The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window as 12-year-old David finished his bowl of cereal. His mother, Dr. Patricia Johnson, was already dressed for work in her navy blue business suit, checking her phone while sipping coffee from her favorite mug. "David, I need you to help me with something today," she said, looking up from her phone. "I have to make a quick stop at the bank, but I'm expecting an important call from the hospital board. Think you can handle a simple errand for me?" David nodded eagerly. He always enjoyed helping his mom with grown-up tasks. It made him feel important and trusted. "What do you need me to do?" His mother walked over to the counter and picked up a sealed white envelope. "I need you to deposit this check and pick up some documents from my safety deposit box. You've been with me enough times to know the routine, right?" "Of course, Mom, I remember everything." "Go to the teller, show my ID, and tell them what I need." David had accompanied his mother to First National Bank many times over the past few years. He knew several of the employees by sight and felt comfortable navigating the marble halls of the impressive building. Dr. Johnson smiled and ruffled her son's hair. "That's my boy. The bank manager, Mr. Thompson, knows you well. If there are any problems, just ask for him, but it should be straightforward." As they drove through the busy downtown streets, David watched the familiar buildings pass by. His mother's phone rang just as they pulled into the bank's parking lot. "Perfect timing," she said, glancing at the caller ID. "This is the call I've been waiting for. It's about the new children's wing at the hospital." She looked at David with an apologetic smile. "I'm sorry, honey, but this might take a while. Are you comfortable going in alone?" David straightened his shoulders with confidence. "I've got this, Mom, no problem at all. I know you do. You're such a responsible young man." She handed him the envelope and gave him a quick hug. "Take your time and I'll be right here when you're done." David stepped out of the car and adjusted his backpack. He was wearing his favorite jeans and a clean blue t-shirt that his mother had ironed that morning. As he approached the impressive glass doors of First National Bank, he felt a familiar sense of pride. This wasn't just any bank to him. This was his mother's bank, the one she had worked so hard to acquire and transform into one of the most respected financial institutions in the city. The cool air conditioning hit his face as he entered the spacious lobby. The bank was busier than usual, with a steady stream of customers coming and going. The marble floors gleamed under the bright lights, and the high ceilings made every sound echo slightly. David had always been impressed by the grandeur of the place, from the elegant chandeliers to the polished wooden desks where customers filled out forms. He joined the line for the tellers, standing behind a woman in a red dress who was fumbling through her purse for something. In front of her, an elderly man was counting bills slowly, his weathered hands shaking slightly as he organized his money. David waited patiently, observing the familiar rhythm of the bank's daily operations. The security guard, Officer Martinez, nodded at David from his position near the entrance. David had met him several times during previous visits and always found him to be friendly and professional. Today, however, Officer Martinez seemed busy helping a customer who had accidentally locked her keys in her car outside. As David waited, he noticed some of the bank employees he recognized. Mrs. Chen, the loan officer, was at her desk helping a young couple with paperwork. Mr. Rodriguez from customer service was explaining something to a confused-looking customer at the information desk. The familiar faces made David feel at ease and confident about completing his errand successfully. The line moved slowly but steadily. David used the time to double-check that he had everything he needed. The envelope with the check was safely tucked in his hand, and his wallet containing his identification was secure in his back pocket. He mentally rehearsed what he would say to the teller, just as his mother had taught him during their previous visits together. "Next," called a voice from the counter. David looked up to see that it was his turn. He approached the teller window with a friendly smile, ready to complete his simple banking tasks. The woman behind the counter appeared to be new, someone David didn't recognize from his previous visits to the bank. The teller, whose name tag read Jessica, looked down at David with a tired expression. She appeared to be in her mid-20s, with blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail and a uniform that seemed slightly wrinkled, as if she had been having a long day despite it being relatively early in the afternoon. "Can I help you?" Jessica asked, her tone suggesting she was already thinking about her next break rather than focusing on the customer in front of her. David placed the envelope on the counter and smiled politely. Hi, I'm here to make a deposit and access a safety deposit box, please. Jessica glanced at the envelope and then back at David, her eyebrows raising slightly. A safety deposit box? How old are you, kid? I'm 12, David replied confidently. I'm here for my mother. She's Dr. Patricia Johnson and she's waiting outside in the car. She had to take an important call, so she asked me to handle this for her. The change in Jessica's expression was subtle but noticeable. Her eyes narrowed slightly and she seemed to be studying David more carefully, as if trying to determine whether he was telling the truth. The friendly, professional demeanor that bank employees typically maintained seemed to slip just a bit. Dr. Johnson, you said? Jessica's voice carried a hint of skepticism that made David feel slightly uncomfortable, though he couldn't quite put his finger on why. Yes, that's right. Patricia Johnson. She's the owner of the bank, David said matter-of-factly, not realizing that his simple, honest statement was about to change the entire tone of his visit. The words hung in the air between them, and David noticed that Jessica's expression had shifted from mild skepticism to something that looked almost like amusement. Other customers in line behind him were beginning to notice that the transaction was taking longer than usual, and David could feel their eyes on him as he waited for Jessica to process his request. What David didn't know was that his simple errand was about to become much more complicated than either he or his mother could have anticipated. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test his character and reveal the true nature of the people around him. Jessica stared at David for a long moment, and then something unexpected happened. She started to laugh. It wasn't a pleasant, friendly laugh that you might hear when someone finds something genuinely funny. This was different. This was the kind of laugh that made David's stomach feel tight and his cheeks grow warm. The owner? Jessica repeated, her voice getting louder. You're telling me that your mom owns this bank? She shook her head and looked around at the other tellers nearby, as if she wanted them to hear this ridiculous claim. David felt confused by her reaction. He had simply told her the truth, the same truth he had shared with bank employees dozens of times before. Yes, she does, Dr. Patricia Johnson. She bought the bank 3 years ago and has been working really hard to make it better for everyone in the community. Jessica's laugh grew louder, and now other customers were definitely paying attention. A man in a business suit turned around to see what was causing the commotion, and an elderly woman with a walker was craning her neck to get a better view of what was happening at the teller window. Oh, this is rich, Jessica said, still chuckling. Kid, do you have any idea how many people try to pull scams in here? Do you think I was born yesterday? David's heart started beating faster. He had never been accused of lying before, especially not about something as simple and true as who his mother was. I'm not trying to pull a scam. I'm just trying to make a deposit and get some papers from the safety deposit box like I always do. Like you always do? Jessica's voice was getting sharper now. Listen, kid, I've been working here for 2 years and I know every important customer who comes through those doors. I would definitely remember meeting the owner of the bank, don't you think? The truth was that Jessica had only started working at the bank 6 months ago, not 2 years like she claimed. She had been hired during a busy period when Dr. Johnson was traveling frequently to banking conferences and meetings with other financial institutions. Their paths had simply never crossed during Jessica's short time at the bank. Maybe you haven't met her yet, David suggested politely, trying to keep his voice calm even though he was starting to feel upset. She travels a lot for business and she doesn't always come inside when we do banking. Sometimes she just drops me off. Jessica rolled her eyes dramatically. Right, sure. The owner of the bank just drops off random kids to do her banking. That makes perfect sense. She looked over at another teller and called out, Hey, Rachel, you've got to hear this. This kid is trying to tell me his mom owns the bank. Rachel, a middle-aged woman with graying hair, glanced over with mild interest. She didn't recognize David either, having only recently transferred from another branch. Really? That's a new one? David felt his face getting hot. He wasn't used to being the center of attention like this, especially not for something embarrassing. The people in line behind him were getting impatient, and he could hear them whispering to each other about the holdup. Look, David said, trying to keep his voice steady. I understand this might seem unusual, but I'm telling the truth. My mom really is Dr. Patricia Johnson, and she really does own this bank. She's sitting outside in her car right now, taking an important phone call about the children's wing at the hospital. If you want, you can call Mr. Thompson, the bank manager. He knows me. Jessica's expression hardened. Mr. Thompson is in meetings all day and I'm not going to bother him with this nonsense. Do you think this is some kind of game? Do you think you can just walk in here and make up stories to get special treatment? The word stung David more than he expected. He had never thought of himself as someone who would make up stories or try to get special treatment. He was just trying to help his mother with a simple task, the same task he had helped her with many times before. I'm not making up stories, David said, his voice getting a little quieter but still determined. Everything I'm telling you is true. My mom worked really hard to buy this bank. She wanted to make sure that everyone in our community had access to good banking services, especially people who other banks might not treat fairly. Jessica scoffed. Oh, please. Now you're going to lecture me about banking services. You're 12 years old. What do you know about banking? I know a lot, actually, David replied, surprised by his own boldness. My mom talks to me about her work all the time. She tells me about the loans she approves to help people buy their first homes, and the small business loans that help people start their dreams. She tells me about the financial literacy classes the bank offers for free every Saturday morning. For just a moment, Jessica looked uncertain. The details David was sharing were accurate. The bank did offer those services, and they were initiatives that had been started relatively recently. But she quickly pushed away her doubts and focused on what seemed obvious to her: a kid trying to cause trouble. That's enough, Jessica said firmly. I don't know where you heard about those programs, but I'm not falling for this act. You need to leave this bank right now or I'm going to call security. David felt a sinking feeling in his stomach. This wasn't going at all like he had expected. He looked around the lobby, hoping to see Mr. Thompson or Mrs. Chen or any of the other employees who knew him. But Mr. Thompson was nowhere to be seen, and Mrs. Chen appeared to be in a private meeting with clients. Please, David said. I just need to make this deposit and get the papers from the safety deposit box. Then I'll leave. My mom is expecting me to complete this errand. Jessica shook her head decisively. No way, I'm not processing any transactions for you. And I'm definitely not giving you access to any safety deposit box. Do you have any idea how much trouble I could get in if I let some random kid access secure banking areas? The irony of the situation would have been funny if it weren't so frustrating. Jessica was worried about getting in trouble with the bank owner for not helping the bank owner's son complete a routine transaction. But she couldn't see past her own assumptions and prejudices to recognize the truth that was standing right in front of her. David took a deep breath and tried one more time. Can I at least call my mom and ask her to come inside? She can show you her identification and explain everything. I don't have time for this circus, Jessica snapped. I have real customers to help. She looked past David to the next person in line. Next, but David didn't move. He couldn't move. He had promised his mother that he would complete this errand, and he had never broken a promise to her before. More importantly, he knew he was telling the truth, and something inside him refused to accept being treated this way for no good reason. I'm not leaving, David said quietly, but firmly. I haven't done anything wrong, and I'm not going anywhere until someone listens to me and treats me with respect. The lobby of First National Bank had never felt so quiet and yet so loud at the same time. Every conversation seemed to stop as people turned to watch the standoff between the 12-year-old boy and the bank teller. David could feel his heart pounding in his chest, but he kept his feet planted firmly on the marble floor. Jessica's face turned red with anger. Excuse me? Did you just tell me you're not leaving? Listen, kid, this isn't your playground. This is a professional business establishment, and you can't just stand here and cause problems for paying customers. David looked around at the faces staring at him. Some people looked curious, others seemed annoyed by the delay, and a few appeared uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. But David remembered something his mother had taught him about standing up for what was right, even when it was difficult. I'm not causing problems, David said, his voice steady despite the trembling he felt inside. I came here to do exactly what I've done many times before. I have a check to deposit and documents to retrieve from my mother's safety deposit box. These are normal banking services, and I'm a legitimate customer. Jessica threw her hands up in frustration. You're not a customer. You're a kid making up stories, and now you're refusing to leave when I've asked you politely multiple times. The woman in the red dress who had been standing behind David in line stepped forward. Look, I don't know what's going on here, but I've been waiting for 15 minutes to make a simple deposit. Can we please resolve this situation? Jessica nodded vigorously. Exactly. See what you're doing? You're wasting everyone's time with this ridiculous charade. She looked around the lobby and raised her voice. I'm sorry, everyone. We have a situation here with someone who's refusing to cooperate. David felt the weight of everyone's eyes on him, and for a moment, he almost wavered. It would be so easy to just walk away and avoid all this attention and conflict. But then he thought about his mother sitting in the car outside, trusting him to complete this important task. He thought about all the times she had taught him about integrity and standing up for himself with dignity. My name is David Johnson, he said loudly enough for everyone in the nearby area to hear. My mother is Dr. Patricia Johnson, and she owns this bank. I understand that might be hard to believe, but it's the truth. I'm not trying to cause trouble or waste anyone's time. I just want to complete a routine banking transaction that I've done successfully many times before. An older gentleman in a gray suit who had been watching the scene spoke up. Young man, those are some pretty big claims you're making. The owner of this bank is a very important person in this community. David turned to face the man respectfully. Yes, sir, she is. She's worked very hard to make this bank a place that serves everyone fairly. She started a program to help first-time homebuyers, and she makes sure the bank sponsors youth sports teams and community events. She believes that banks should be part of the community, not just places that take people's money. Jessica scoffed loudly. Oh, now he's an expert on community banking, too. This is getting more ridiculous by the minute. She reached for her phone. I'm calling security to have you removed. Wait, said another voice. It was Rachel, the other teller who had been watching the situation develop. Jessica, maybe we should check with Mr. Thompson before we escalate this. The kid seems to know a lot about the bank's community programs. Jessica shot Rachel an annoyed look. I told you Mr. Thompson is busy. I'm not going to interrupt his important meetings because some kid watched a commercial about our services and thinks he can fool us. David pulled out his phone. Can I at least call my mom and ask her to come inside? That would settle this whole thing in about 2 minutes. Absolutely not, Jessica snapped, reaching across the counter. Give me that phone. For all I know, you're calling your friends to come in here and back up your story. David pulled his phone back, clutching it protectively. You can't take my phone. I haven't done anything illegal. I just want to call my mother. You're causing a disturbance and refusing to leave when asked, Jessica replied. That's trespassing. She looked toward the entrance. Officer Martinez, we need some help over here. Officer Martinez, the security guard, looked up from where he was still helping the customer with her locked car keys. He had been only half paying attention to the commotion at the teller window, but now Jessica's call made it impossible to ignore. He walked over slowly, his expression neutral but alert. David had always liked Officer Martinez during their previous encounters, and he hoped the guard would remember him. What's the problem here? Officer Martinez asked, looking first at Jessica and then at David. Jessica immediately jumped in. This kid came in here claiming his mother owns the bank. When I told him that was impossible, he refused to leave. Now he's holding up the line and disturbing other customers. Officer Martinez looked down at David with a thoughtful expression. There was something familiar about the boy, but he couldn't quite place where he had seen him before. Son, what's your side of the story? David took a deep breath. Officer Martinez, I'm David Johnson. I've been here with my mom several times before. She's Dr. Patricia Johnson, and she really does own this bank. She's waiting outside in the car because she had to take an important phone call. All I wanted to do was make a deposit and get some papers from her safety deposit box. Officer Martinez frowned slightly. The name Patricia Johnson did sound familiar, but he dealt with so many people every day that he couldn't be certain. Do you have any identification, son? David nodded and pulled out his wallet. Yes, sir. Here's my school ID and my library card. They both have my name on them. Jessica leaned forward. Those don't prove anything about who his mother is. Anyone can get a fake ID made these days. Officer Martinez examined the cards carefully. They looked legitimate, and the name David Johnson was clearly printed on both. But Jessica had a point. The cards didn't prove anything about the boy's mother. Here's what we're going to do, Officer Martinez said. David, I'm going to need you to call your mother and ask her to come inside. If she really is who you say she is, this whole thing will be cleared up quickly. David felt a surge of relief. Thank you, sir. That's all I wanted to do in the first place. But Jessica wasn't finished. With all due respect, Officer Martinez, we can't just take this kid's word for it. What if he's part of some kind of elaborate scam? What if the person he calls isn't even his mother? We need to think about the safety and security of this bank. The woman in the red dress sighed loudly. "This is absolutely ridiculous. I just wanted to deposit my paycheck." Other customers began to murmur their agreement. The line was getting longer and people were getting frustrated with the delay. David could see that the situation was spiraling beyond his control, but he refused to give up. "Look," David said, addressing everyone who was listening, "I understand this seems unusual, but I'm telling the truth about who my mother is. She's probably wondering what's taking me so long right now. All I'm asking for is the chance to prove it." Jessica shook her head firmly. "We've wasted enough time on this nonsense. Officer Martinez, please escort this young man out of the bank so we can get back to serving our real customers." David felt a crushing sense of disappointment and frustration. He had tried to be polite, he had tried to be patient, and he had tried to be reasonable. But it seemed like nothing he said or did would convince Jessica to treat him with basic respect and fairness. Just as Officer Martinez was about to reach for David's arm to guide him toward the exit, the automatic doors of the bank opened, and the clicking sound of high heels on marble echoed through the suddenly quiet lobby. "Dr. Patricia." Johnson stepped through the glass doors of First National Bank with the confident stride of someone who belonged there. Her navy blue suit was perfectly tailored, her silver jewelry caught the light from the chandeliers, and her presence immediately commanded attention from everyone in the lobby. She had ended her phone call early when she realized David had been inside much longer than a simple deposit should take. Through the large windows, she had caught glimpses of what appeared to be some kind of commotion, and her maternal instincts told her that her son might need her help. The first thing she noticed was David standing near the teller counter, surrounded by a small crowd of onlookers. His shoulders were straight and his chin was up, but she could see the stress in his posture. Officer Martinez was standing beside him with his hand outstretched, as if he was about to escort David somewhere. And behind the counter, a young blonde woman was gesturing animatedly while speaking in a voice loud enough to carry across the lobby. Dr. Johnson's trained eye quickly assessed the situation. As someone who had spent years in business negotiations and boardroom discussions, she could read the tension in a room within seconds. This was clearly not going well for her son. "David?" she called out, her voice cutting through the murmur of conversations. "Is everything all right over here?" Every head in the lobby turned toward her. David's face lit up with relief and gratitude, while Officer Martinez looked confused. The customers who had been complaining about the delay suddenly seemed very interested in what was about to happen next. But Jessica, who still didn't recognize the woman walking toward them, rolled her eyes and let out an exaggerated sigh. "Great. Now we have another one," Jessica said loudly. "Let me guess, you're the famous bank owner too, right? This kid has been wasting everyone's time with that ridiculous story." The lobby fell completely silent. Dr. Johnson stopped walking and turned her full attention to Jessica, her expression shifting from concern to something much more serious. When she spoke, her voice was calm but carried an unmistakable note of authority. "I'm sorry, but I don't believe we've met. I'm Dr. Patricia Johnson." She extended her hand toward Jessica in a gesture that was both polite and commanding. Jessica hesitated for a moment, suddenly unsure of herself, but she reached across the counter to shake the offered hand. "I'm Jessica Williams, and I'm a teller here. Look, ma'am, I don't know what kind of game you and this kid are trying to play, but this kid," Dr. Johnson interrupted, her voice still calm but with an edge that made several people in the crowd take a step back, "is my son, and I'd appreciate it if you would refer to him by his name, which is David." Jessica's confident expression faltered slightly, but she wasn't ready to back down. "Anyone can claim to be anyone. I've been working here for 2 years, and I know every important customer. If you really were the owner of this bank, don't you think I would have met you by now?" Dr. Johnson studied Jessica's face carefully. "You said you've been working here for 2 years?" "That's right," Jessica replied, lifting her chin defiantly. "That's interesting," Dr. Johnson said thoughtfully. "Because I personally review the employment records of every person who works in this bank, and according to my files, you were hired 6 months ago. Your previous employer was Riverside Credit Union, where you worked for 18 months before being terminated for customer service issues." The color drained from Jessica's face. Around the lobby, people began to whisper among themselves as they realized that this well-dressed, authoritative woman seemed to know details that only a bank owner would know. Officer Martinez stepped forward, recognition finally dawning on his face. "Dr. Johnson, I'm so sorry, I didn't recognize you at first. I've been dealing with that car lockout situation, and I wasn't paying close attention to what was happening over here. Dr. Johnson smiled warmly at the security guard. It's quite all right, Officer Martinez. You are doing your job, and I appreciate your dedication to keeping the bank secure. She turned back to Jessica, whose face was now pale and whose hands were trembling slightly as she gripped the edge of the counter. Now, Dr. Johnson continued, I'd like to understand exactly what happened here. My son came in to make a routine deposit and retrieve some documents from my safety deposit box. This is something he's done successfully many times before. Can you explain to me why that simple transaction turned into this public spectacle? Jessica opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. She looked around desperately, as if hoping someone else would jump in and help her explain the situation. Rachel, the other teller, stepped forward hesitantly. Dr. Johnson, I think there may have been a misunderstanding. Jessica didn't recognize David, and when he mentioned that his mother owned the bank, she thought what exactly? Dr. Johnson asked, her gaze moving between Jessica and Rachel. She thought he was lying, Rachel admitted quietly. She thought he was trying to pull some kind of scam. Dr. Johnson nodded slowly, processing this information. She looked at her son, who had remained quietly beside Officer Martinez throughout this exchange. David, can you tell me what happened, in your own words? David took a deep breath. I came in to make the deposit and get the papers, just like always. When I told her who you were, she started laughing and said I was making it up. She said I was trying to scam the bank and that I needed to leave. When I tried to call you to come inside and explain, she tried to take my phone away. She said I was probably calling friends to come and back up my story. Dr. Johnson's expression grew more serious with each detail David shared. She turned back to Jessica, who was now visibly shaking. Is this an accurate description of what occurred? She asked. Jessica tried to speak, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. I was just trying to protect the bank. We get all kinds of people trying to pull scams, and I thought... You thought what exactly? Dr. Johnson repeated. My son is well-dressed, polite, and articulate. He had legitimate banking business to conduct, and he provided you with accurate information about who he was and why he was here. What exactly made you think he was trying to deceive you? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Jessica looked around the lobby, searching for support, but found only curious and increasingly disapproving faces staring back at her. Mrs. Chen, the loan officer, had emerged from her office when she heard the commotion. Now she stepped forward with an apologetic expression. Dr. Johnson, I am so sorry about this situation. If I had known David was having difficulties, I would have intervened immediately. Dr. Johnson smiled at Mrs. Chen. Thank you, Linda. I know you would have handled this properly. She looked around the lobby at the crowd of customers who were still watching the drama unfold. I want to apologize to everyone for this disruption to your banking experience. This is not the level of service that First National Bank strives to provide. Several customers nodded appreciatively at her professionalism and grace under pressure. The woman in the red dress spoke up. You don't need to apologize, ma'am. The problem wasn't with you or you. Son. Dr. Johnson turned her attention back to Jessica, who was now crying softly behind the counter. When she spoke again, her voice was firm but not cruel. Jessica, I need you to understand something very important. This bank serves everyone in our community equally, regardless of their age, their appearance, or any assumptions you might make about them. What happened here today was not just poor customer service. It was discriminatory behavior that goes against everything this institution stands for. Jessica nodded miserably, finally understanding the full magnitude of her mistake. But Dr. Johnson wasn't finished yet. Dr. Johnson placed a gentle hand on David's shoulder, and he could feel some of the tension leave his body. Having his mother beside him made him feel safe and supported, but he could also sense that this situation was far from over. Jessica, Dr. Johnson continued, her voice measured and professional, I need you to help me understand your decision-making process today. When a customer provides you with accurate information about their banking needs, what is your typical response? Jessica wiped her eyes with a tissue and struggled to find her voice. I usually process their request and try to be helpful. And when a customer tells you something that surprises you, what would be the appropriate way to verify that information? Jessica's voice was barely audible. I could check our customer records or ask a supervisor, or call the customer's account holder to confirm. Exactly, Dr. Johnson nodded. Those are all professional, respectful ways to handle unusual situations. Can you explain to me why you chose none of those options when my son came to you today? The question hung in the air, and Jessica struggled to provide an answer that wouldn't make her look even worse than she already did. The truth was she had made assumptions based on David's age and appearance, and those assumptions had led her to treat him with disrespect and suspicion from the very beginning. "I don't know," Jessica finally whispered. "I guess I wasn't thinking clearly." Dr. Johnson studied Jessica's face for a long moment. Around them, the lobby had grown quiet again as customers and employees waited to see what would happen next. "Jessica, I want you to think very carefully about this question. If a 12-year-old girl who looked different from David had come in with the same story, would you have reacted the same way?" Jessica's face crumpled and she began crying harder. The question had forced her to confront the uncomfortable truth about her own biases and assumptions. She had treated David poorly not because of anything he had done wrong, but because of who she thought he was based on his appearance. "I'm so sorry," Jessica sobbed. "I'm so sorry. I was wrong, and I know I was wrong." Dr. Johnson's expression softened slightly, but her voice remained firm. "Jessica, I appreciate your apology and I believe you're genuinely sorry. But this isn't just about hurt feelings. This is about the fundamental values that this bank represents in our community." She turned to address the lobby full of customers, her voice carrying clearly across the marble floors and high ceilings. "Ladies and gentlemen, First National Bank was founded on the principle that every person deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their background, their age, or their appearance. We serve this community because we believe that financial services should be available to everyone who needs them, not just to people who look a certain way or fit certain expectations." Several customers nodded in agreement, and David felt proud of his mother's words and the way she was handling this difficult situation. Dr. Johnson continued, "What happened here today represents a failure of those values, and as the owner of this bank, I take full responsibility for that failure. It's clear that we need to do better in training our employees and ensuring that every customer receives the respectful service they deserve." She turned back to Jessica, who was still crying behind the counter. "Jessica, your employment with First National Bank is terminated, effective immediately. Someone from Human Resources will be in touch with you about final paperwork and procedures." Jessica nodded through her tears, understanding that this was the natural consequence of her actions. Rachel helped her gather her personal items from behind the counter while Officer Martinez discreetly positioned himself nearby, in case any additional security was needed. Dr. Johnson then addressed the other bank employees, who had gathered to watch the situation unfold. "I want everyone to understand that this is not just about one person's mistake. This is about all of us doing better. We're going to be implementing mandatory training for all employees on customer service, unconscious bias, and treating every person who walks through our doors with the respect they deserve." Mrs. Chen stepped forward. "Dr. Johnson, I think that's an excellent idea. Many of us would benefit from additional training and discussion about these issues." "Thank you, Linda. I'm glad to hear you say that." Dr. Johnson looked around the lobby one more time. "I also want to establish a clear policy that any customer who feels they've been treated unfairly can ask to speak with a supervisor immediately, and we will take their concerns seriously." The woman in the red dress raised her hand slightly. "Excuse me, Dr. Johnson, but I just wanted to say that your son handled himself beautifully today. He was polite and respectful even when he was being treated badly. You should be very proud of him." Dr. Johnson smiled and squeezed David's shoulder. "Thank you so much for saying that. I am incredibly proud of him. He showed tremendous courage and integrity in a very difficult situation." David felt his cheeks grow warm with pride and embarrassment. He hadn't expected to become the center of attention like this, but he was grateful that people had noticed his efforts to remain calm and respectful. Officer Martinez approached them as the crowd began to disperse, and normal banking operations slowly resumed. "Dr. Johnson, I want to apologize for not recognizing the situation sooner. I should have been paying closer attention." "Officer Martinez, you handled the situation professionally when it was brought to your attention. That's what matters," Dr. Johnson replied. "But I would appreciate it if you could make sure all of our security staff are familiar with members of my family, just to avoid any confusion in the future." "Absolutely, ma'am. I'll make sure that happens right away." Rachel, who had returned from helping Jessica, approached hesitantly. "Dr. Johnson, I want to apologize for not stepping in sooner. I had doubts about what Jessica was doing, but I didn't speak up when I should have." Dr. Johnson nodded thoughtfully. "Rachel, I appreciate your honesty. Sometimes the most important thing we can do is find the courage to speak up when we see something wrong happening. That's a lesson for all of us." As the immediate crisis passed and the bank returned to its normal rhythm, Dr. Johnson finally turned her full attention to the original purpose of their visit. "Now," she said with a smile, "I believe my son has some banking to complete. David, do you still have that deposit?" David grinned and pulled out the envelope that had started this whole adventure. "Right here, Mom." Mrs. Chen immediately stepped forward. "I would be honored to help David with his transaction." As they walked toward Mrs. Chen's desk, Dr. Johnson reflected on the events of the afternoon. The situation had been painful and embarrassing, but it had also provided valuable lessons for everyone involved. It had shown the importance of treating every person with dignity, the courage required to stand up for what's right, and the power of addressing problems directly and honestly. That evening, as they drove home together, David asked his mother a question that had been on his mind all afternoon. "Mom, do you think Jessica will be okay? I know she was wrong, but I still feel bad that she lost her job." Dr. Johnson considered her son's question carefully. "David, that's a very compassionate question, and it shows what a good heart you have. Jessica made some serious mistakes today, but I believe people can learn and grow from their mistakes if they're willing to do the work. Losing her job was a natural consequence of her choices, but it doesn't mean her life is over. Hopefully, this experience will help her become a better person and a better employee somewhere else." "Do you think what happened today will make the bank better for other people?" "I think it will," Dr. Johnson replied. "Sometimes difficult experiences teach us important lessons that we wouldn't learn any other way. Today taught all of us about the importance of treating every person with respect, regardless of who we think they are or what assumptions we might make about them." As they pulled into their driveway, David felt a sense of accomplishment and pride. He had faced a challenging situation with dignity and courage, and with his mother's support, they had turned it into an opportunity to make positive changes that would benefit everyone who visited the bank in the future. The story of what happened at First National Bank would be remembered by everyone who witnessed it as a powerful reminder that every person deserves to be treated with respect, and that standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult, can lead to meaningful change.